This is Wednesday, September the 7th. This is going to look at George Washington's second term. In 1792, George Washington was persuaded to run for a second term. Now, Washington's first term had been dominated by domestic affairs. In Washington's second term, he will be concentrating on foreign affairs. There will be a revolution going on in France, and there will be Indian problems in the Ohio River Valley. Now, the King of France had bankrupted his country supporting the U.S. in the Revolution. In the time of our Articles of Confederation and Washington's first term, France was hit by a drought that ruined the wheat crops, and Frenchmen were beginning to starve. In 1792, the King of France is going to be overthrown, and he is going to be killed. This is the same year that Washington is elected to his second term. Now, just about every country in Europe is going to declare war on France and the new French government. Now, this puts us into a bind, because America during the Revolution had signed a pact with the king, pledging that we would come to the aid of France if France was ever attacked. Because of the French Revolution, many Americans saw the cause of the French people as the cause that we went through during our revolution. But Washington felt that coming to France's aid would be a mistake. He asked the American people to take a pledge of neutrality. Now, neutrality is where you do not support either side. The French government was incensed by this and tried to get the United States involved. France is going to send a series of representatives to the United States to speak to the American people, so the American people will persuade Washington to have our country join on France's behalf. The most famous of all of these representatives was Citizen Genet. Now, during the French Republic, men and women were called citizens. And Citizen Genet will travel throughout the United States, and he will call upon the American people to support the French government. When Genet met with President Washington, Washington told Genet that the U.S. would not honor its treaty with France. Genet is incensed, and Genet all but said that he was going to continue to go through the country and rile up the people, and one way or the other, Washington would support the French Revolution. Now, we're going to skip over this slide. To avoid problems, the president was backed by Hamilton and Jay. Hamilton and Jay both said to the president that a war in which we supported France would bring Great Britain into a war against us, and they felt that this would be a disastrous war. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison felt that we had to meet our obligation of the treaty that had been signed after the Battle of Saratoga, that this would be bad faith if we did not go along with the French. The rift in the administration was the beginning of what are called political parties. Politically, do you support Politically, do you support Hamilton and Jay, or do you support Jefferson and Madison? Political parties would begin to show their influence in the next election, the 1796 election. At the same time we have problems with France, we also have problems with Great Britain. Great Britain is beginning a practice of impressment. Now, impressment is where a British warship will sail along the side of an American merchant ship. The American merchant ship will stop, and the British will go on board looking for British deserters. Even if you weren't a British deserter, they would take who they needed, take them onto the British warship, in the name of impressment. Now, this impressment is an armed British warship against an unarmed American merchant ship. It is important that the United States stop this so that our trade can continue. To end impressment, President Washington is going to send John Jay, who at the time was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, to negotiate a treaty. In the treaty, Jay believed that war was avoidable, and that's the reason why he pushed the British so hard. When the agreement was finally done, really there was nothing about impressment in the agreement. There was nothing about the fact that British agents were stirring up Native Americans along the Great Lakes and the Ohio River Valley. Jefferson opposed the treaty, and when Washington said he was going to send the treaty to the Senate, Jefferson is going to resign as Secretary of State, again furthering the split between Washington, Adams, Jay, and Hamilton versus Jefferson and Madison. Jefferson's supporters in the Senate objected to the treaty. Now, you needed 2/3 approval, and Jay's treaty barely got 2/3 approval. Have we written in our notes that Jay's treaty was between the United States and Great Britain, and it really did nothing. At the same time, President Washington had sent Thomas Pinckney to Spain. Now, Pinckney is going to create something called Pinckney's Treaty. In Pinckney's Treaty, the Spanish agree that the Mississippi River is a neutral river. Not only can the Spanish use it, but so can the Americans. And New Orleans would be a neutral port. Now, technically, New Orleans was part of the Spanish Empire, but we can use New Orleans and not have to pay tariffs. The treaty would allow farmers from Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee to get their grain to market by river. Now, instead of going over the Appalachians, you can put your barrels onto barges. The barges will float down the Ohio, float down the Mississippi, and then they can be transferred to ocean-going ships. Now, as you see on the slide, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee are about ready to join the Union. We've already had one new state, Vermont, join the Union in Washington's first term. In 1796, Washington chose not to run for a third term. Honestly, Washington could have run for as many terms as he wanted. Washington will begin a tradition, and no American president will run for more than 2 terms until 1940. Now, today, no American president can run for 2 terms. The 22nd Amendment says that the American president is limited to 2 terms. Washington wrote a letter to Congress before he left, and Washington warned future leaders not to get involved in European entanglements. The United States would not become involved in European entanglements until 1916, when we joined Great Britain, France, and Russia in World War I against the Germans, Austro-Hungarians, and Turks. During Washington's administration, political parties began. Jefferson's ideas and politics created the Democratic-Republican Party. Now, it's important that we put Democratic-Republican. It will not be until 1920 that the Democrat-Republican Party will split, and the Democratic Party will be born from that. The Democrat-Republicans spoke of strong state government. They believed that the strength of the country was in the agrarian class. They believed that the state government had the right to not abide by federal laws. The Democrat-Republicans believed in a low tariff. The Democrat-Republicans were opposed to British forts in the American West. This would be Ohio and Great Lakes, and had hoped that the next president would do more to stop Indian attacks in this area. Democrat Republicans believed that if the Constitution did not expressly allow for an action by the federal government, then the action could not take place. There is a term on your term sheet called strict constructionist. This is what strict construction means, that if the Constitution does not allow for an action to take place, then the action may not take place. The opposite side were the Federalists. Washington, Adams, and Hamilton formed the Federalist Party. Now, Washington never came out and said that he was a Federalist, but by his actions it was pretty obvious. The Federalists believed in a strong central government, that the central government would be more powerful than the states. The Federalists believed that the future of the United States lay in manufacturing, and they proposed that Congress make up laws that would allow for manufacturers to be protected from foreign entanglements. They created a high protective tariff. This way, our prices could not be undercut by any of the European countries. Federalists believed that a war with Great Britain would be disastrous. Federalists believed that if we went out west and attacked British forts, and we were pretty sure the British were putting the Indians up to attacking American settlers, that this would create a war with Great Britain, and this would be disastrous. Federalists believed that if the Constitution did not expressly prohibit an action, then the action could take place. This is what we call a loose construction. This, again, is on your term sheet. Now, we'll have to do some comparing and contrasting in Adams' term, who was a loose constructionist, compared to Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe's term, who were strict constructionists. Both parties would choose the nominee for president in 1796 through a caucus. Now, a caucus is where a small group of party faithful will come together and they will choose who the candidate will be. Now, caucus was all the rage in the 18th century and the first half of the 19th century. Now, when we get to Andrew Jackson in 1824, we're going to go to a new system. You can see on the map that the green states were those states whose electoral college voted for the Democrat-Republican Jefferson. And the brown states are the Federalists who went for John Adams. Adams would receive the most electoral college votes, and Adams would become president of the United States. But the Constitution said that he who got the second most votes would get the vice presidency. So Thomas Jefferson received the second most votes, and he became vice president. Now, we no longer do this because of the 12th Amendment to the Constitution. And the 12th Amendment was needed because of something that happened in the next election, the election of 1800. President Adams is going to keep the cabinet that Washington had at the tail end of his second term. Adams believed that they were loyal Federalists. Unfortunately, they were more loyal to Hamilton and Jay than they were to Adams. Now, there is a lag time between the election and the inauguration. And during this lag time, the United States Army is going to go into the Ohio River Valley. Now, in what is now Indiana, the Army is going to fight against Native Americans at what is called the Battle of Fallen Timbers. A tornado had knocked down a group of trees, and the Americans are going to use that as protection against the Native Americans. It will be a great victory for the Americans over the Native Americans. The Americans are led by Anthony Wayne. but everybody referred to him as Mad Anthony Wayne. Mad Anthony Wayne had been a general during the American Revolution, and Mad Anthony Wayne's attack will open up the Indiana Territory. Now, we will still have more battles in the Indiana Territory, but now Ohio is secure from Native Americans, and Indiana becomes one of our territories. Well, this would be a good place for us to stop. Tomorrow we'll look at the Adams administration.